Okay, so now we are in the recording phase. So starting with the servlet lifecycle, going into the deep servlet lifecycle. So initially when the servlets were not there, so we have like CGI. So like all the static websites were running on the CGI. That was a common gateway interface. So do you know the basic difference between the CGI and the servlets?
Not exactly.
Okay, so I think I have figure to showcase something. Okay, so what happens in like CGI server now? I mean, in today's applications, you deploy your applications on Tomcat, JBoss, or the web application server. But when these were not available, so we used to deploy the applications on the CGI server, and we used to interact with the common gateway interface. So let's understand what was that. So let's say you sent a request from the Facebook. Okay, you go and log in a page from the Facebook. You open www.facebook.com. So what happens? A request gets generated which hits your server. Okay, then it creates an object. Okay, creates an object of your server side code. Then it process it and then send it back to you. Okay, now let's say you sent a request from the another computer or from the another browser. What it will do, it will create an object again. It will create an object again for you of your program, and then send back a response. If you see this in figure, like say this is the browser one. From the browser one, we are sending request from the home program. So home program is basically, let's say it is deployed in your CGI server. Okay, this is the common gateway interface. So we are sending a request for the home program. Then it gives a uh, uh, then it gives back to us response. Okay, and let's say from the another browser, you send the request for the same object, and then it prepares a response and send back to you for the browser too. So you so there are two objects which got created for the two requests. Let's say you have now n number of requests. Let's say you have millions of requests, then the millions of objects would be created, right?
Yeah.
So here the performance will be degraded, and soon it may happen that you would be having out of memory, and your server won't be able to take up much load. Okay, but when we comes to GSP servlet, like if we talk about the servlet container, so in servlet container, it doesn't matter how many requests you are sending, there would be only one object which would be handling all of your requests. So let's say if we talk about like there is a servlet container which is deployed, which is running on your Tomcat, okay, or any other server, application server, JBoss or WebLogic or anything. Okay, so from the first browser you sent a request from the home program which is deployed on your Tomcat. Okay, it will instantiate an object for you, and it will prepare a response and send it back to you. Let's say from the browser 2 you sent a request from your home program, then it prepares a response from the same object and send back to the browser 2. Now let's say you create a request for the another servlet that was a login.
Browser.
Yeah, I'm able to hear you now. Yeah, tell me.
Just give me 1 minute. I'll
Yeah, yeah,
just.
sure. So if you see this in like GSP servlet, like servlet container, which is running on your Tomcat or any server or any application server. So you send a request from the browser one for your program. It creates an object for your program and it handles your request. It prepares a response and send it back to you. From the browser to or from another system, you create a request, you send it to the server. The same object prepares a response and send it back to you from the home program. You create a request for the another servlet, it creates an object of another servlet and it prepares a response and send it back to you. So so the object so the objects that so each time for each servlet there won't be explicit objects, while in case of if you see in CGI, for every request you were creating an object, right? So that is the advantage of JSP over CGI. And another thing is that it is more of Java, so it is platform independent. Any questions on this?
So only when another servlet is instantiated, you get new object, right?
Other servlets would be
No, when another servlet is instantiated, so like you see another object over here.
this is object for the login program. This okay. So okay. So let's say this is the home program. It prints hello servlet. Okay, this program, hello program. This is hello program which prints hello servlet or hello world. Okay. So when you send a request for this program, it creates an object for this program for browser one. When you send a request from browser two, it again creates an object for the same program, right?
Yeah.
So you have created two requests for the same program and it instantiated two objects for you. Now when you come to your servlets, so what happens is you send two requests for the home program and it creates a one object only. So the one object is handling here both the request. So the another object would be created as soon as you receive the request for the another servlet. Got it? Okay. Any questions on this? Okay. So let's go back to our main life cycle. Okay. We discussed that there is an init method, there is a service method, there is your destroy method. But we haven't, actually seen, okay, if you create any servlet, okay, okay, this is the test servlet I have created. So Eclipse has auto-generated code for me. Okay, if you look at this auto-generated servlet code, you see this is a constructor. We can see this is a do get method, this is the do post method. But when we talk about the life cycle, so there is a method init, there is a service, and there is a one destroy method, which is not in picture in this class, right? Okay. So let's go one by one every classes. This test is actually extending the HTTP servlet. Your HTTP servlet is having the parent generic servlet. Your generic servlet is again having the parent servlet. Okay. So the servlet is the main interface which we inherited in our classes at the end. Okay. And these classes is having all the functions. If you see this is the init, this is your service method, and this is your where my cursor is. My clips got hang. Okay. So this is one destroy method. In the servlet interface, there are other methods like get servlet config, get servlet info. So I'll tell you this servlet config and servlet info, but as of now, just I'll tell you what is that servlet config and servlet info. So in the servlet, there is one init, service, and destroy, which your servlet container handles. Yeah, the servlet lifecycle with these three methods only. This is init, service, and destroy. If you see this, this is an interface only. We have an implementation in, so there is one generic servlet. So generic servlet is basically, which is you can see that it is an abstract class which is implementing your servlet. Okay. So if you see this now, we can see something. Okay, your init takes your servlet config object. Servlet config object is basically, okay, let's complete this. We will then discuss servlet config and servlet context parameters. This is generic servlet. It it is uh, it is not associated with your any protocol. Protocol, when I'm saying protocol, so when you go to your browser and when you do like www.google.com, so you are actually following a protocol that is HTTP, right? So there can be a n number of protocols. It can be your SMTP protocol, it can be your FTP protocol, or it can be of any type of protocol. So the generic servlet is not following any protocol. So the generic servlet is like, you have to make something which would be, which would be more oriented towards HTTP. Okay, so the your generic servlet is not specific to any protocol. It is a protocol independent class. To make it HTTP protocol following class, you have to implement it in some other class. If we go like in HTTP servlet, so the HTTP servlet is the one class which is actually protocol oriented class. Okay, so which would be running in your HTTP methods. It would be following your HTTP, all the request and the agreement of HTTP protocol. Okay, so we have discussed like the super parent is a servlet. Okay, let me show you. This is servlet interface. This is the parent one. This is generic servlet. Okay, and okay, and this is HTTP servlet. So HTTP servlets would be following all the protocols of HTTP. Okay, and then you can, if you want to create any of the servlet, then you can inherit the HTTP servlet, because whatever the request you would be sending, that would be associated with the HTTP. So you should always extend your servlet classes with the HTTP servlet. Okay, and your uh, if you are not writing, like in our class, if you see this, these are not having your init, service, or the destroy method. But if we go above in HTTP servlet, if you go in generic servlet, then it would be inheriting those method from the generic servlet. So your this test class would be inheriting init, service, and the destroy method from the generic servlet. Can do this. My servlet. But if but your container but your servlet container gives you an opportunity to override all these methods. If you want to override, like your if you want to override init method, if you want to override your service method, if you want to override your destroy method, so you have an opportunity to override all these methods, because it may happen that while instantiating all the parameters of the servlet lifecycle, you wanted to you wanted to perform some sort of action during initialization of a servlet. Let's say you wanted to upload a file, or you wanted to read a file, or you wanted to initialize a file object, or you wanted to read a file from the file system and wanted to load in your application. So you can do this in your init method, and then in the service method it can be used. So so I'll show you how we can do this. But are these classes clear to you? Servlet, generic servlet, HTTP servlet, my servlet. Okay. Now, if you see this, like there is a serial version UID. So basically, the serial version UID we have given because your HTTP servlet method implements the serializable interface. So basically, serializable interface is something which is a it doesn't have any method. Uh, so serializable, what serializable interface does, it is basically for converting your data or the class data into the byte stream and persist into your file system and transfer the object over the networks. So let's say you have a class, or let's say you are playing the game. Okay, you playing the game and you clear the level 1, level 2, and after clearing level 2, uh, you shut down the game, and once you start the game, you wanted to resume from the game 3, right? So sorry, from the level 3. So what you can do, from the level 2 you can persist, you can serialize the object of game up to level 2, and once you start the game you can deserialize and start from the level 3. So it kind of these things. Or it may happen that when you transfer the byte of stream over the network, then you should also go for the serializable interface. Once you implement the serializable interface, then it is then you should always provide the serial version UID. There is a reason behind the serial version UID overriding, is that once you serialize something then there should be one serial version UID should be generated in the serialized file, because it may happen that once you serialize an object, and you changed that code in the server. Okay, and when you are deserializing the file again, then you can have an exception. Okay, so that is why we always keep the serial version UID, so that it can be matched while deserialization. Okay, so now let's come back to our this. Okay, so the servlet info is basically it actually there is, so I told you, like there are 5 functions: init, destroy service. There are other two methods in the servlet class, that is get servlet config and the get servlet info. Get servlet info is basically who is the author, what is the version of the servlet, and all these things, the copyright and all the stuff related to your servlet. Another is servlet config. Servlet config is the object which would be having, if we open like servlet interface, so you would be able to see it is again having some set of functions like your servlet name, the servlet conf the servlet config interface would be associated per servlet. So if you have like 10 servlets, so there can be 10 servlet config objects which would be having its own servlet name, servlet context. I'll explain it again, init parameters and init parameters name. So I'll tell you these functions as well. So servlet config, once your init method is being called of your servlet lifecycle, so its servlet config is the object from which you can get the initialized values. So let's say your from the initialized method, you in your in your web.xml you define that uh, a name should be defined with sign and id should be initialized with 1. Okay, so you want these values to be initialized as soon as init would be called up. Okay, so these value you can retrieve with the servlet config object. So from the servlet config object you can get this init parameter names. So you can get what type of init parameters name, and you can get the value of that parameters name. Let me show you this as well. Uh, okay, okay, so if you see this is the servlet name, this is the servlet class it is pointing. Okay, and this is the init palms. So these will get initialized when the init method would be called up. This is init palms, this is having the tags init palms, open closed. This is palm value is like having the key value pairs, like name would be like key and the value would be pair, the value would be this. Again, if you want to define age and you wanted to define predefined value as 22, so you can add any number of parameters here. Okay, so these are the so this is how you can define the init palms. These would be initialized when, as soon as the init method would be called up. So if you go back to your servlet config, okay, so this get init parameter names, so it will be having all the names of the variables which are being initialized in web.xml for that particular servlet. So we have defined name and age. So my get init parameter names will return I have initialized name and age. So if I wanted to get the value for the corresponding name and age, then what I can do, I can call get init parameter. I can call this get init parameter. I can provide like name or age, then I'll get the initialized value for that. Let's see this working in code. I think I have already done this. So let me show you. Okay. Sai, in between, if you find any question, just ask me.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay, let's run this. Okay, and let me. Okay, okay. So let's run this. If you see this init palm start is having the parameter name and this age, and init palms end. If you go in the code, like we can see this from the get servlet config, I get the config object, and from the config object I get the init palms. From the init palms I iterated all the init palms that are initialized during the that was given in the web.xml for the initialization. So these are getting initialized when the init was called. So I printed all the names of the variables which are getting initialized. So these are the this name and age. If I wanted to get the value of this age and name, then what I can do, I can go ahead and call another method, that is uh, get init parameter, and I can provide, say, if I start it again, if you see this init palm start, I get the variables which are getting initialized as well as its value. I called this get init parameter and provided the name of the variable which I initialized. So this is like the init function which is being called up. So you can also override the init. So if you wanted to overwrite, and if you want to perform something, like you can override these things. So what I have done is, like, I have override this init method, and I called all the functionalities which is being called in the above classes. So you can do this with the super parameter, with the super and the function which you called up. So what it will do, it will go to the immediate hierarchy, go to the immediate parent and calls this function. Okay. So super.init, uh, it is having HTTP servlet. If it is in HTTP servlet, then it will call the init method from there. If it is not there, it will go to the generic servlet, then it will call it from there. Okay. Then you can provide your own functionality over there. If you wanted to provide some functionality, that would be, you can provide. If you wanted to add some additional functionality. Okay. So this is like if you wanted to override the init. So this was about like the init.
And here, why we are using throws servlet exception?
Okay, so I haven't used this servlet exception. Okay, so I have overridden this. So your generic servlet has this implementation in it throw servlet exception. Let me show you. If you see this in your API, your method declaration has this throw servlet exception. So it is being thrown up. It is actually being thrown up when there is some issue while initializing your variables, or your 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 servlet container is not able to initialize the values for you, or not able to call the init properly. So it will throw servlet exception there. Okay. So I have done the same. Okay. When you are actually explicitly overriding this, so it will, you also need to provide this throw servlet exception. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah.
So this is like the init. And now let's come to service method. So you can also override your service method. So service method actually takes two objects, request and response. Okay, let's discuss this first, request response. What is that request response? Let's go to the hierarchy. This is servlet request. Let's see what is. Okay, servlet request is an object which is actually being created when you make a request and send it to the server. Let's say from your browser you make a request and you send some set of values or some set of parameters to the server that you want to perform some sort of action. So that the values, that object which is having, that information that you wanted to perform some sort of action, that would be associated with your servlet request object, and that will, and this is a servlet request object that is created by your servlet container. Okay, and that will go and head to the application. So servlet request is having all the parameters which you are sending from the browser, and the servlet response is the object which you would be sending back to the browser, that would be rendered and would be visible to you on the UI page. This is servlet request and this servlet response, and it throws servlet exception and input output exception. So this is again is having the this type of declaration in the generic servlet. Okay, if you are overriding and you wanted to perform like the same thing, uh, that is that is your parent is doing, then you can do this like super dot service. If you don't, if you are overriding and you don't give this line, then you need to provide your own logic that if it is a get request, then it should go and call the do get and do something. So if we go in the immediate hierarchy, what it does is it creates this HTTP request method and HTTP servlet response method, servlet response object. If you go in HTTP servlet request and response, it is again like, uh, I would say it is a, you can say that child of servlet request, which is actually following the HTTP protocol. Okay, it is like the same having your generic servlet, your HTTP servlet was implementing the uh, HTTP servlet was implementing the generic servlet just to make it the HTTP protocol. I mean, more of HTTP protocol. So it is having like your request response object is more of HTTP request response object. Okay, so if you see this in the service method, so basically it creates it again calls a one service method which is inside this on the basis of what type of request it is, a get or it is a head, post, put, delete, option states, what type of call it is, what type of call you are making from your UI or from your URL. So it calls start function. It calls start function accordingly. So let's say uh, now if we come to the second function of the life cycle, that is a service. But when we create actually servlet, so what we do, we create like do get, do post. So what service method do is, service method is actually redirects your request to the do get or do post or do put based on the action you are performing from the UI. Okay, so that is why you have do get and do post. And your service method, you don't need to be worried about like do service, because from the parent it would be called up, and from the child it will redirect to your do get and do post methods. Got it? Okay.
And like in service,
Oh, hold on. Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
in service class, while we are declaring variables HTTP request and response, right? So
Uh,
if the declaration over there is not representing object, it is how it is declared. That HTTP response and the variable, right?
can you repeat your question?
In service class.
In service method.
Yeah, yeah. In service
Okay.
method, not in method. Yeah, sorry.
This is the one.
Yeah, yeah, this is the one. Like, while you are declaring these variables, request and response, so uh, these are HTTP servlet request. What is that exactly?
Okay. So your service method takes two parameters, servlet request and response. So whatever the request you are sending, that is associated with your servlet request. HTTP servlet request is a child of servlet request. So I have shown you like the generic servlet and the HTTP servlet, right?
Yeah,
When I was talking about the HTTP servlet, so it is more of HTTP protocol. It was following a protocol which is HTTP. And if we are making like HTTP servlet requests, that is why we are specifying that it should also follow the HTTP protocol rules. So that is the main reason it is creating the HTTP servlet request response object. If you see this, it is downcasting into HTTP servlet and request response object. Your servlet request object gets downcasted to HTTP servlet request. Can you see this?
yeah, yeah.
And then again you call the inner service method. From the inner service method, then you actually make a call to do get and do post on the basis of what type of request it is. Is that clear?
Yeah. Response and request, those are objects, right?
Yes. So
So,
request is having whatever the parameters you are sending from the UI, from the client.
like HTTP servlet request by itself, it is some class or interface.
HTTP servlet request.
Uh,
Okay, it's an interface.
so, like, here we need not create any object by itself. Like, if you give some
No, no,
parameter.
you don't create any object. The servlet container basically actually creates all the objects for you. If you start creating an object for these classes, then you know you will kill the life cycle. Then there won't be any use of the servlet container, because servlet container is the one thing which is actually responsible for creating these internal objects. Okay. So this is how you can actually create override the service method. Service method is basically pointing again to your do get and do post requests. Okay. Then you have like your destroy method. Destroy method is again once. Once your application is not in service, then it would be called up. When I'm saying this is not in service, let's say you have a 10 request and 10 request was in service and was in service and all the 10 requests have been completed. Then after a certain threshold time period, it would be a destroy would be called up, and uh, your servlet would be unloaded from the container, servlet container. Then your destroy would be called up. Okay. I think servlet lifecycle is clear now.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have talked about like servlet config, where your init parameters get defined up, and it is per servlet. The object is for each servlet. It is one object for each servlet. There is one like servlet context object. Okay, servlet context object is your per application object. If I show you web.xml, uh, you have some time, right? We can extend it. Like, I mean, we can go for 9:30, 9:45. Okay, okay, okay. If you see this, I have defined this context palms. Okay, these context palm are associated with your application, and this init parameters get associated only with your this hello servlet class. So from this servlet only you can get these parameters. But if you wanted to get these parameters across your servlet, then you should go for the context palm. So it will be always up and running your these context palm parameters. If I define this country, India, company name, HCL, okay. So these are the applications. I can use these variables in any of the servlets. But if I wanted to use this init parameters, then these are associated, these are bound to only this servlet, because these are the servlet variables, you can say that. Okay, so this is the difference between, and these servlet parameters init params you get from the servlet config object, right? And this context palm object we get from the servlet context. So there are two things, servlet config and the servlet context. If I show you in the code, we we got that, we get this get servlet config. From the servlet config we get the init params. The same way we can do like servlet context, get servlet context. We can
And
get the
get
yeah,
servlet config is a method, right?
get servlet context is a method, right?
Not the full like get servlet config.
Can you repeat?
Get servlet config.
We have two things, servlet config, servlet context. Get servlet context gives you an object of servlet context. Okay, and get servlet config object gives you an object of servlet config. If you go in like servlet config, so these are the things I have shown you, like servlet config get, where from the servlet config you can get servlet name, get servlet init parameters, right? So the same way we have like servlet config. Let me show you servlet config interface. Sorry, servlet context interface. If you see this, like we have like get context path, so it has more methods. It You can get all the servlets which are available in your application, all servlet names, okay, and servlet context names, everything you can get.
So the declaration over there. So get servlet config. It is a method, right?
Yeah, it is a method.
No, no. Okay. Servlet config. Some variable equal to get servlet config. Like how it is declared. Servlet config is an interface. And
Servlet, yeah,
yes,
configuration
full
interface.
line expression how it is
You're saying how it is getting the object.
like how it is declared. I'm like it is object is
let's go to its declaration. Okay, if we go like, when you do this get servlet config, so it will go to its immediate hierarchy and then get the object from there. If you see this, it returns the config type of object. Config object is defined in your generic servlet, which is a servlet API, and this is the servlet object which is actually being initialized from your servlet container. So your servlet container, if you see this, uh, your servlet container is the one who actually creates a config object for you, servlet config. So this servlet config objects get created when your init gets called up, because servlet config is having all the information of your initialized variables. You got that?
Yeah, yeah.
Or is there still confusion? Sai, do you have some confusion on that?
Yeah, yeah. Still, like how means like how we are equating it to.
Interface?
So like is
Okay.
that object declaration or like it is already
Okay.
predefined object so that you are.
Okay. 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 This is a one class. I create a one interface test in. Okay. And it has a one class. So this test in is an interface. Okay. And this is test in is the implementation, which is the class. So my interface is holding the object of the implementation. Okay. Now I do something like, now I do this get test in impl. Okay. And I instantiate an object here. Okay. So from the interface, I'm getting this test, get test in impl. And this is the function which is not visible to you, and this is actually taken care by your uh, servlet container, the initialization of this uh, object. So the same way, the the servlet context and the config called get servlet context, but the object is being written by the servlet container. You actually never create this object explicitly, but while during the running of the life cycle of a servlet, it gets created by your servlet container and returned, and this get servlet context return the same object which is being created by your container, and then we can, from that object we can actually uh, use the functions of these servlet context. Is it clear now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So what is the difference between servlet context and config? Can you tell quickly? Sai,
Yeah.
can you quickly tell me what is the difference between servlet context and config?
Con-
You there, Sai?
Yeah, I'm there.
You have some confusion, or you want me to repeat that?
No, no, I'll revise everything. Then you can have some sessions. Like
Yeah, tell me then. Or should I repeat it? Servlet config, servlet context. What is the difference between config and context?
carry on today. Yeah, tomorrow next after meeting
Okay.
I'll.
Sure. So let me repeat like this: config and the context. Con the servlet config objects are get initialized uh, when your init function gets called up. Okay, and these are per servlet. I mean, for each servlet there would be servlet config parameters. And it would be specific for that servlet only. Your servlet context parameters also get initialized during the init function call, but it is per application. Okay, this is, you can say this is kind of a global variable, you can say global variable for your application. So in servlet context, if you see that uh, if you see like your web.xml, these are the context palms. These are the context palms I have defined. So these are the variables that are global variables for your application, and this is only for the your servlet context. And this servlet config are these, that is per servlet. It is specific to your servlet, uh, servlet per servlet.
Yeah,
For each servlet there are some init parameters you can define.
okay.
Now it's clear.
Yeah,
Okay. So this was like the detailed life cycle, how all the parameters. Let me quickly check if I have missed anything. Okay, this was the detailed life cycle and all the parameters which are being used in the servlet life cycle. Okay, so there are servlet scope as well. Okay, so when you define a servlet, so you actually have some scope of a servlet as well. Okay, so it can be application scope, it can be request scope, it can be session scope. Okay, your servlet scope can be of three types: application, request, session. So the application scope is like your servlet context. Again, servlet context. So if you see this, like these context palms, so these are the values are up and running till the time your application is running. Your server is up and running, your application is up and running. So these values you can get anytime. So this is something like your application scope. Okay. Request scope is something like it is only available during your request. The the objects which are only available during your request. And the session scope is like you have opened a one tab, you have opened it one tab in your browser, then you open a tab again in the browser, another tab, and you are opening again the same path, then you would be able to get the same values again, all the values that would be persisted for the same tab. I mean, these are the some kind of scopes. Okay, so this is something like, okay, scopes. And one more thing, like if you wanted to use this context palm and the context init palms in your HTML, then how you will use it? Let's also see this, like how you will see this. Okay, so what I have done in the doGet method, I have sent response stat set content type HTML. Okay, it would be text HTML. I have I have get one object of servlet context, and from the servlet context I created a one print writer object. From the print writer object I would be writing hello world, then I would be writing my country name is, then I would be calling this get init parameter, and I would be providing what type of the name of the parameter for which I want to get the value. Okay, if you see this in like uh, web.xml, we have defined country and the company name. Okay, and these are the names from which you can get the value. So I provide this country and the name. Okay, let's run this now. Country name is India, company name is SCL. Okay, if you see in your web.xml, this is the value we have defined, India and HCL, and this is what it is printing. Okay, so this is how you can use like servlet context parameters. The same way you can get like servlet config object and you can use it. By default, whatever the request you send it from the browser, so it goes like a do get request, get get type of request. Okay. Okay, so this was something like the detailed life cycle, and the life cycle also you are familiar with all the HTTP methods, like what is like do get, post, put, delete is being used.
HTTP methods, no. Like I'm aware of them. Like if there is something like much in it.
Okay, okay, let me cover that as well quickly. Okay, the four function which gets repeatedly used is like get. Get is the most common which is being used. If you wanted to retrieve certain type of resources, let's say you wanted to get some page, or you wanted to let's say you wanted to get the list of users from the database, then you would go for the get operation. You wanted to get that all the resources. Okay, then in that case you should always go for the get. Post is something like when you wanted to create a resource. Let's say you wanted to add a resource, okay, or you were actually logging a page and then you click on the submit. Then you are actually posting something. You are posting some data to the server. Then you should go for the post method. Put is something that if you wanted to change that resource, let's say you have a resource and you wanted you have a user and you wanted to change that user last name in the database, then you should go for the modification of the user. That for that you should go for the put method. Let's say if you wanted to delete a resource, then you should go for the delete method. I mean, these are the four most common method which you should use it. I mean, you should be aware of that. Okay, this is the HTTP method. And HTTP protocol, you are aware of that. What is HTTP and what is, you understand this, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me know once you start getting bored so we can wrap up. Okay, now let's see if we wanted to, write one login page with the servlets. Okay, so this is the login form. This is like the HTML. Okay, this is form action login. So it tells what type of uh, the URL, the URL of my servlet. Okay, and this is the post. It is telling that the method would be of type post. Okay, the form action, what should be the action when I perform like this submit and all. This is name, input type text, user ID. I think you are more on UI side, so I don't need to tell everything. So I think you are able to understand this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let me go and run this. So once I do this login.html, it loads up the page name and password. Okay. If I go if I go my to login HTML, then once I perform action on this, so this the URL for the login would be called up. The URL mapping for this login is being done in web.xml. If we open .web.xml and if we go for the login, then you will see that login pattern slash login, it has servlet name login. The servlet name login is being mapped to a one servlet login class. So this is the one class which would be actually called up. Okay, so let's put some this. So as soon as I provide my name and password, so what it will do, it will call up this do post method, which would be having my HTTP request and HTTP response parameters. Okay. Then what it will do from the request, it will get this get parameter. Now whatever I fill in the username, let's say I provide name as a Gaurav and password as a password. Okay. So how to retrieve this value from the, I mean, what I enter into the text box. So this is the way. From the request, this request dot get parameters. So this is user ID and the password. If you look into the HTML of this login.html, so this is the name I provided, login ID and password. Okay. So this is how with the same names you can provide this get parameter, and then from the get parameter you can actually get the value. Because once I submit this, what it will do, it will create a request and send back to the server. So my request will be having all the values, right? So from the request I can retrieve these values, right? once i once I validate like my request ID and the password is valid, then I can, redirect. I'll tell you this request dispatcher what it is. So then you can redirect to a page that you are a valid user. If it doesn't match, then you can see that it is an invalid user. So let's do this. Let's log in with this. Let's see what happens. So you can see this. Welcome to my application, Gaurav. Now let's provide some random password or wrong password. So it says that invalid password. So what I did is, when I'm entering the password, I matches with some hard coded value password. Okay. If it matches, then it says that welcome to Gaurav. It redirects me to the index.jsp. Index.jsp, let's see what it has. Index.jsp. Index.jsp is nothing. Welcome to my application, and it is getting whatever the user ID, whatever the username I am providing, it is fetching these. Welcome to my application, Gaurav, it will print. I'll discuss this JSP later, like when we will start JSP, but let's concentrate on the this methods. And let's say if doesn't match with the password, what it will do, it will go to the login page again. So I mean, this is how it happens. I need to discuss like a request dispatcher and this include forward, and these are the some methods I need to include. I mean, I need to discuss. I think for today, I think we have covered like much detailed. So you want to go for like request dispatcher as well if you have some time, or you want to continue in the next class, or it is overloaded.
That would be fine.
Okay, next would be fine. Okay, so when you wanted to have next, tomorrow we cannot have. Tomorrow I'm going back to Delhi. So tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, we can do this. Okay, let me stop the recording first. Okay.